Today, we are going to continue that by noting that God's judgment actually takes away problems. We're going to note that a lack of belief in God's judgment is what leads to problems, more problems than judgment. Okay, I'm going to start over. We've been in Genesis chapter 6, the beginning of the flood story, and we've been thinking about the idea of God's judgment. Today, we continue that by noting that doing away with God's judgment actually creates more problems than it solves. Believing that God judges problems creates problems for our heart and for our mind. But as much as we don't like reading passages like Genesis chapter 6, the idea that God will ultimately exercise judgment is actually a good thing. It is something that solves a lot of problems. The absence of a God who judges means that we live in a world where absolutely anything can go. And this was what Nietzsche argued, right? The Death of God, German philosopher who said, look, as soon as people wake up and realize that there is no God, they're not going to be kind. All that's going to matter is power, and ultimately it's going to lead to a 20th century that will be a complete bloodbath, which of course is what the 20th century turned out to be. If a moral God does not exist, we have no ability to expect morality. We have no ability to say that Cain shouldn't have killed Abel. Okay. Why would we say that that was wrong? If there is no straight edge, how can we say anything is crooked? If there's no set standards, there's no God and no righteousness that comes out of his character, then how are we to say one thing is right and one thing is wrong? How are we to say that Robert Jarvik, the creator of the Jarvik heart, one of the early prototypes of an artificial heart, Jarvik was an interesting guy. And one of the things that he asked was, where do we get the idea of human rights? There's no scientific basis whatsoever to believe that people have any rights. Who's to say that a person has rights and that a virus doesn't have rights? Who's to say that it's okay for a spider to eat a fly, but it's not okay for us to kill somebody? Because he says there's no such thing, there isn't a God, there's no such thing as human rights. We just try to get together and affirm some social constructs that are going to prevail, but those constructs can fail. Another way to unpack this is to understand that many people believe that believing in a God of violence, many people believe that believing in a God who exercises judgment is going to lead to a world of violence. Miroslav Volf, the great sort of Croatian theologian who grew up in the midst of violence and strife, said, it's actually the opposite. He said that, look, the violence that he saw in the Balkans was because there was no belief that God would ultimately judge. And so if there's no belief that God is ultimately going to judge, then I have to take vengeance myself. And if I overstep what is perceived by others to be my rights, there will be no consequences if I'm the strong man in this situation. So he argues that violence thrives today in the Balkans because most people believe that God will not take up the sword, will not settle accounts, therefore they must. He argues that believing in a God of vengeance actually leads to the actions of Christ, to turning the other cheek. Because we can be assured that God will one day make things right, that he will step in as judge, and that he will exercise perfect judgment. I have to tell you, it is my belief that God will ultimately judge that allows me to have any sense of belief that the world works and to make sense of what I see and God not acting. One day God will judge. Again, I want to say, I don't want justice. I want mercy and grace. We find that in Jesus. But it is a good thing, not a bad thing, that there is a God who exercises judgment. Have a good day.